In Ontario, the Ontario College of Teachers oversees the profession of teaching through regulation, governance, and licensing. The college sets a standard of practice that we as Ontario teachers must adhere to. Those standards include commitment to student and student learning, professional knowledge, professional practice, leadership in learning communities, and ongoing professional learning. When a teacher does not adhere to these standards and/or regulations under the Education Act, they may be accused of professional misconduct and/or incompetencies and brought before the disciplinary committee. This was the case for Mrs. BC on October 20th, 2016, when her case was presented to the disciplinary committee of the College of Teachers. Mrs. BC was accused of failing to maintain the standard of the profession, failing to comply to subsection 264 under the Education Act, and displaying a lack of knowledge, skill, or judgment, and or disregard for the welfare of her students, of the nature or extent that demonstrates that the member is either unfit to carry out his or her professional responsibilities. The college, therefore, sent out an expert witness to observe Mrs. BC's classroom. And there were 3 different performance appraisals that were followed through by Mrs. P, and each time Mrs. P found that assignments were not aligned with students' abilities, and her 45-minute lessons resulted in boredom and a lack of engagement amongst her students. Now, Mrs. P gave Miss B sufficient notice of her poor performance and attempted to provide support for improvement in the future. However, Miss B did not show any signs of improvement, and therefore the court came to conclude that Mrs. BC was found guilty, reprimanded, and her certificate of qualification and registration was subject to terms, conditions, and limitations. If Mrs. BC would choose to return to a teacher in the future, she would need to provide proof of completion of additional qualifications that covers curriculum, lesson plans, instructional strategies, and assessment to the registration with the name of her employer. She must also have her employer carry out 2 teacher performance appraisals within 2 years. The next case was in 2015 with Mr. C. Now, the allegations made against Mrs. BC and Mr. C are the same, except Mr. C additionally had a failure to adequately supervise students who were under his supervision. He was committing acts that would be regarded by members in all circumstances as disgraceful, dishonorable, and unprofessional, contrary to the Ontario Regulation 437/97. In this case, complaints were made by parents and students against Mr. C for his lack of safety and classroom management. Some of Mr. C's challenges included failing to connect to the curriculum expectations, failing to familiarize himself with safety procedures, and failing to ensure that students follow safety rules. Mrs. B, Mr. C's principal, testified to having addressed these complaints and tried to help improve these by having meetings with him, setting expectations, monitoring his performance, and providing support. Despite Mrs. B's efforts, Mr. C was unable to learn how to provide a safe environment for his students or to manage his classroom well. Therefore, the OCT found Mr. C subject to a 3-month suspension. The OCT found this reasonable, seeing that no child was hurt during his class time. In addition to his suspension, a rehabilitation component was also imposed to ensure Mr. C learned how to properly plan lessons, manage his classroom, instruct the curriculum, and assess student learning. Altogether, it is important for us to remember that failing to act can be as bad as acting inappropriately. Misconduct can occur when you fail to perform your teacher duties, such as preparing proper lesson plans or employing good classroom management strategies. These cases are reminders that not everyone is capable of teaching well. As new teachers, it is also good to know the responsibilities of principals as it pertains to us. Principals are responsible for providing appraisals and support and will give teachers sufficient opportunities to improve. When a teacher does not make the necessary changes, their principal may testify against them in front of the disciplinary committee.